and I hope. Firstly, just to introduce myself, my name is Nicole Gordon, and I'm the CEO of Jnetics, and I will actually be chairing the session this evening. So we're delighted to have you with you this evening, and hope you will find the event both interesting and informative. Before introducing our fantastic lineup of speakers, I would just like to take a couple of minutes to explain to you the incredible life-saving work that Jnetics are doing with our community. Jnetics was established some 11 years ago, actually by Katrina Sarah, give us a wave, who's here in the audience tonight, and is the only cross-communal charity in the UK dedicated to the education, prevention, and management of Jewish genetic disorders. Our mission is simple. We are here to ensure that no more babies are born into our community with one of the life-threatening, life-shortening genetic disorders that Jnetics screen for. On the recessive side, we screen for 47 conditions through schools, universities, and the Jnetics Clinic, which targets young couples before they embark on parenthood. To date, we have screened over 5,000 individuals and detected mutations in genes for all 47 conditions that are actually on our panel. This highlights the importance and the relevance of the work we are doing within the community. With regards to dominant disorders, we currently educate and support and signpost, but are absolutely delighted that from early 2023, in conjunction with CHI and other community stakeholders, we will be working closely with NHS England to ensure the effective and responsible rollout of a BRCA screening programme for which anybody with one Jewish grandparent will be eligible. This really is a breakthrough for our community, and we are indeed honoured and privileged to have such a fantastic lineup on our panel this evening, who will enlighten us on the whole topic of BRCA testing, how and why it came about, and how Jnetics and CHI are here to support the community every step of the way. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our speakers. Firstly, to Professor Ranjit Manchanda. Ranjit is a professor, I have to read this because there's a lot. Ranjit is a professor at Wilson Institute of Population Health, Queen Mary University of London, consultant gynecological oncologist at Barts Health NHS Trust, and honorary professor for the Department of Health Services Research, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Ranjit holds a distinguished Infosys Chair in Oncology at All India Institutes of Medical Sciences. Ranjit's research interests are focused around targeted precision prevention. This includes population-based genetic testing, mainstreaming genetic testing, and precision medicine approaches for risk prediction, stratification, targeted screening, and cancer prevention, as well as economic evaluations related to these areas of research. And we're not finished. Ranjit led the research work, which you may or may not have heard of, called the GCAP study, into population BRCA testing in the UK Jewish population. He received an NHS Innovation Accelerator Fellowship for implementing population genetic testing in the NHS in 2019, and this is now very much in progress. Ranjit has been instrumental in NHS England's launch of the forthcoming population-based screening programme, the Jewish population, and for that, as a community, we are hugely indebted. Lisa Still, in the green dress, fellow Scot.
Not so.
Lisa is the Chief Executive of High Council Care. After graduating in psychology and administration, Lisa worked in advertising in London before a career change into counselling and psychotherapy. Lisa worked in private practice before coming to Hyde as a counsellor in 2001. She was appointed Client Services Manager in 2008 and appointed Head of Operations in 2010, and in 2012, Lisa became Chief Executive. Lisa, together with her sidekick, Louise Hager, have built the most fantastic organisation here at Hyde. Now to Rabbi Oliver Joseph, who's on my far right. Rabbi Oliver Joseph is a carrier of a faulty BRCA gene, who has lived the experience of bereavement in his immediate family owing to BRCA-related cancers. A simple BRCA test has permitted Rabbi Oliver and his wife to start a family by way of IVF PGD, a fertility treatment which enables families to do away with the faulty BRCA gene for the next generation. Rabbi Oliver is a freelance rabbi based in North London. He runs the Habura, a young Masorti community. He also serves as a prison chaplain, consults to UK charities on Jewish community engagement, and teaches in schools, universities, and communities across the UK and Europe. Rabbi Oliver lived and studied in Israel for 5 years and graduated from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles. And finally, but not lastly, to our very own Gila Vazmuel. Pronunciation? Yeah. Everyone needs a leg here. Genetic Outreach Research and Development Manager. She is responsible for assisting with the research, development, and delivery of all our screening programs, developing the organization's outreach and education activities through the UK, and ongoing genetic research projects. Gila has an extensive background and knowledge in human reproductive science and assisted reproductive technologies. Her academic background covered a BSc in biomedical science, an MSc in reproductive science and women's health, and a Master of Research into infertility in the English Orthodox Jewish population. So without further ado, I'm actually going to pass over to Gila, who's going to give us an introduction to BRCA and genes.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for that introduction to all of us and to our speakers. And thank you all for joining us tonight. As Nicole said, I'm going to be giving you an introduction to BRCA. What is it? What is a gene? What does it do? And what happens when it goes wrong? And why is it important for us to talk about it tonight and in general? So before we start and before we go into BRCA, let's try to understand what are genes and what are their functions in our body. So we find DNA in every cell, and genes are sections of DNA. Now, why do we talk about genes? Genes have very specific functions in our body. So for instance, from the way we look, the color of our hair, the shape of our eyes, shape of our nose, anything from most basic to most difficult, as for instance, the way our organ systems work and the way everything about us works. So as simple as that. And when we try to understand DNA and our genetic code, it's important for us to know that we have 2 copies of every gene. So we inherit 1 copy from our mother or 1 copy from our father. And together, they make up our genetic code. So the way I like to explain a genetic code is, for instance, a code of information and a code that basically gives the instructions for our body to work. So let's say, for example, in a book, you have chapters, you have paragraphs, you have sentences. So if you imagine a sentence in that book, which says, I stand here with you, and if there's any change in that word stand, then that sentence no longer means the same thing. There is a change, so it changes in its meaning. It is exactly what happens in our genetic code. If there is any minor change in the way that the genes come together or in the bases that make up the genes, then those genes no longer function. And what does that mean? It means that, for example, let's say a gene that is supposed to control something specific in our body, then it will no longer do that. So any change in any gene could sometimes be fatal. So let's move on to BRCA. So the most important thing that we all need to know is that everybody is born with 2 copies of the BRCA gene. And you can have BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene. And this BRCA gene has a very important function in the body. As you can see here, the BRCA gene is a tumor suppressor gene. And what does that mean? It means that if at any point in anyone's life, there are some cancerous cells that might be developing, this BRCA gene will make sure that these cells develop no further and that the cancer is stopped so that it doesn't develop into a full-on cancer. So we need to know 2 things about this gene. And the most important thing is that it's a dominant gene. And what does that mean? So when we look at genetic inheritance, we have 2 patterns. We have recessive genetic inheritance. So for instance, some of you might have heard of Tay-Sachs, cystic fibrosis, and many other genes. As Nicole mentioned, we work a lot on the recessive side. And what that means is that we may have healthy carriers. So a person that may carry the gene for a faulty Tay-Sachs gene or faulty cystic fibrosis gene, but they're not affected and will never be affected by that specific condition. So when we look at dominant inheritance, that means that the presence of one faulty gene will result in that person being affected by the lack of both healthy genes. So what does that mean? That means if a person is born with one faulty BRCA gene, they are more likely to develop some certain types of cancers. So that's important for us to know. And I think it's important to mention here that if, for example, we have a person that is positive with BRCA mutation, this person will pass on a 50% chance will pass on this gene to their child. And that is at every conception. Now, why do we talk about it? And I think Professor Manchanda will definitely go into more detail on this. But why do we talk about this in the Jewish population? And why do we discuss it? And why do we focus so much on raising awareness? And the main reason is because 1 in 40 people with any Ashkenazi background are BRCA positive. What does that mean? They have one of the faulty BRCA genes. That is 1 in 40 in the Ashkenazi population, and in the Sephardic population, it's 1 in 100. When you look at that little square on your left, you will see that the general UK population is 1 in 250. So there is a big, big gap. Professor Manchanda did a lot of work into trying to understand what this was and to try to explain. He will tell us more about it later. So as you can see, this is why we make a big point on raising awareness on the BRCA gene. Now, as I mentioned before, the BRCA gene is very important when it comes to suppressing the development of cancerous cells. And the reason when a person is born with a faulty BRCA gene, they may develop some of the cancers that are here on this screen. So that is breast cancer, melanoma, pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer. As you can see, it's not just women, it's men as well. So this impacts both. And fathers can also pass it on to their sons, to their daughters, and mothers to their sons. So it can really be either way. On this table here, I think everyone can see it, we'll just move out of the way. I mentioned that there were 2 types, so BRCA1 and BRCA2. So it depends, the main difference between these genes is that they can impact or increase the risk or the development of any of these cancers. So for instance, when we look at the BRCA2 mutation, if a male has that BRCA2 gene, they have a 6% risk of developing breast cancer. So higher than if they had the BRCA1 mutation. For example, when we come down to melanoma, the last one on our list, we can see that a person with a BRCA2 mutation has a 3 to 5% risk of developing melanoma. When we look at ovarian cancer, those with the BRCA1 gene are at a much, much higher risk of developing it than those that carry BRCA2. So we always need to take these 2 genes into consideration. As you can see, they change the risks and they are important for us to discuss. Now you might be wondering, why is it important for somebody to know this information? And how can people find out if they are BRCA positive or not? The way to go about identifying if somebody has the BRCA mutation is by having a genetic test. And this can be done via a saliva test or a blood test. And it is very important as it will help and will give people information, allow them to make decisions about their lifestyle, will also allow them to go for more frequent cancer screening, speak to their GP and decide if they should have medication or not, plan to decide or not decide if they want to have preventative surgery. For some people, it might also mean fertility preservation. So there is quite a lot of information that once somebody gets screened and they find out about their BRCA status, they can prepare, they can inform themselves, make the right decision, and decide how they want to go about their BRCA diagnosis. So at the moment, how can people be tested? One way is to go on the NHS And as you can see on the screen, it's very restrictive at present. So it depends on a person's age. It depends on their family history. So say, for example, how many people in their family have had breast cancer, ovarian cancer, or any of the other cancers that are related to the BRCA gene. And this obviously people from the same side, so say for example, 2 or 3 people on the paternal side that have had breast cancer or ovarian cancer, so they look at these different things. And obviously if the person themselves have had any of those cancers, and at the moment, only Ashkenazi people are considered. So if a person fits into all of these criteria, they can then be tested free on the NHS. If not, their option is to go private. However, this is all about to change. As Nicole mentioned, early next year, thanks to Professor Manchan and all his research, we are going to move from a family-based screening to a population-based screening. So what does that mean? That means that anyone with any Jewish family history, so for instance, 1 Jewish grandparent is enough for anyone to come forward, self-refer themselves to be tested for the BRCA gene. And this will be a very simple test where they can be screened from the comfort of their home and will have access to information and counseling, and it will be done in a responsible way. So this all will be hopefully launched early next year. If anyone wants to sign up or wants more information, please follow the link here, or just go to our website and then search NHS BRCA screening. It's all on there. And yes, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this evening and I look forward to
Yeah, so thank you, Gila, and a special thank you to Gila, because the person who was meant to be doing that presentation is actually not able to be here, so she did it a very, very last minute. Yeah, thank you, Gila, that was excellent. Like, just hope you have so much to place in action. So I'm now passing over to Ranjit and Shanza, who is going to talk to us about the research that he's done, how this whole program has been about, and as I said before, we're as a community truly indebted to Professor Manchan for the work that's actually done here in the
Thank you. I should start to stand here.
Are we here?
No.
Sorry, it will come back in 1 second.
It's an honor and privilege to be here. And Nicole, thank you for your kind and generous words. Right. I'm going to talk about population testing for BRCA. I was just telling Lisa that it's all come full circle. I came into this area way back in 2006 and 2007 as a young PhD student, and we developed this study. And I remember it was Ian Jacobs, who was my supervisor, came and gave the first talk, which actually launched, which when we launched GCAPS, and it was at high. So it literally has come full circle. It's very nice to be back again and talk for the study and where we've gone. Just some disclosures. We saw the disclosure slide. Our population testing work. GCAP study was funded largely by the EVA field, but the work in population testing is also supported and funded by the NHS Innovation Accelerator, Yorkshire Cancer Research, and Cancer Research UK, and some other disclosures at the bottom. And also just to acknowledge and highlight the fact that it's been a huge community effort. The first year of the project was just spent in community engagement. And there was huge amount of community input, lots of colleagues here contributed to that. Just to acknowledge all the charity support and organizational support we had when we developed and did the project. And literally that engagement and support and input went into every aspect of this work. And now we picked up the NHS Cancer Program, which is really, really fantastic because it brings it to fruition. I'm going to cover the background. It's nice to be able to follow Gila because she's laid the ground nicely. And I can speak through a couple of the slides. Talk about Jewish population BRCA testing. Briefly summarize the information that we have from the research that's been done. And finish with a little bit about the NHS implementation. So the number of So cancer is becoming more and more common. We're living longer. And if you look at the statistics on cancer, then the number of cases and deaths from cancer is predicted to increase. And the International Association of Cancer Research says that almost 1 in 2 people in their lifetime subsequently will get cancer. And over the next 20 years, the number of cases both for breast and ovarian cancer is going to increase not only in the UK but worldwide, more worldwide. Just 30 to 40% of ovarian cancers and 10% of breast cancers in the Jewish population are caused by the BRCA genes. So these are potentially preventable. This is a much higher proportion than, say, breast cancers and ovarian cancers caused in the general population, which is the non-Jewish population, the rural population. So there's a higher opportunity to prevent more cancers in the Jewish community than if we did the same thing in the broader general population. It's about 2.5 times. The strategy has always been to try and pick up more people at risk. How can we pick up more people who are at risk so that they can be informed and we could have better cancer prevention, better screening, early diagnosis, and save more lives? It's all about providing information, opportunity, and trying to reduce cancer incidence and save lives. And I hope we'll persuade you that population testing is the most effective way to do it, or to achieve the outcome on the right. We have already mentioned that it's quite common in the Jewish population, and 1 in 14 the Ashkenazi Jewish population compared to 200 to 250 to 300 in the general population. And in the Jewish population, we're really testing for predominantly 3 mutations or 3 faults in that spelling code, or 3 mistakes in the spelling code. And they account for most of the mutations or faults you find in the Jewish population. There can be thousands of faults in the BRCA gene code. But in the Jewish population, just 3 are very common. They call found mutations. So, one of the questions is, what is the size of the Jewish population in the UK? There's also debate around that issue, where you have the ONS data, but you also have data from other Jewish policy research groups, which suggest there's underreporting. So, assuming it's between 270 and 330,000, we anticipated between 8,500 and 7,000 approximately BRCA carriers in the Jewish population. We looked at the data from all the London genetic testing labs since testing began in the NHS across the 16 million population across London, and across the Jewish population, a large part of the Jewish population lives in London. And we found that more than 90% of the carriers are undetected, despite about 25, 30 years of NHS testing. So we've heard about the benefits of identifying someone who may be at risk. And there's the option of surgical prevention. So removal of breast tissue, or something called mastectomy, reduces breast cancer by 90%. Removal of tubal and ovarian tissue is too bad ovarian, not just ovarian. Once the family is complete, can significantly reduce the risk of getting ovarian cancer, and prevent ovarian cancer. In medicine, nothing is 100%. So it's not 100%, but it's 98, 99% effective. There's the option of screening. It's there for breast cancer. It's well established to improve survival when you can pick up cancer early. Screening for ovarian cancer has been published in research trials, and screening in the general population didn't show a benefit. Screening in a higher risk population is being reviewed by the NICE committee at the moment. And that will report in 2024, so I think we need to wait for that. Say anything about it. Not allowed to say anything about it till then. So then there's the option of lifestyle and reproductive choices. We heard about PGD, sure we're going to hear more about it. So there's a whole range of options, all of which can affect risk. There are some risks also, there's some barriers, there's some downsides. There's the issue of impact on family dynamics, emotional well-being. There's the issue of confidentiality, anxiety, distress. Manageability is a big important issue in the community. Some people may be stigmatized if you have that information. And is it worth investing for the health system to do it? Is it cost effective? So if you do it for everybody, is it, does the system gain? There is a science to that. And all these questions need to be addressed. So we just heard about family history of breast and ovarian cancer and how that's used as a surrogate to try and identify someone to pick up someone who's at risk who can have BRCA testing. And the NHS, 2007, I think the cost of a BRCA test was about £2,000. Today you can get it from anything from $100 upwards. $100 to $200 you can get a panel test today. So the cost has really fallen over the last 15 years. Technology has really driven this. When it was expensive, it used to be 20% chance of getting a BRCA gene mutation. You can have the test for years and ticket taken. That threshold fell over the years, it became 10%. So if there's 1 in 10 chance of carrying a BRCA gene, the health system says, yeah, here you go, you can have a ticket. But if you're 9%, you can't get it. So we built these criteria largely driven by our understanding, based on various models, but also mainly cost. And most of the people who are going to carry the gene are going to be under that 10%, not above that 10%. So by definition, the system is not set up to identify a majority of people who are at risk, and that's the problem with this family history-based approach. It's an international problem, it's not just a national problem. It's the way we practice medicine. So most carriers don't know about it, most people aren't aware of it. Number of people don't know their family history, both health professionals and the public. There's limited awareness. I think as a community, we have our responsibility to try and increase that awareness. So there's huge underutilization of gene testing. And our research shows that if you use the same criteria that Geela showed, so you can't by definition identify 6 in 10 people who are at risk. So if something is working at 100% efficiency, you wouldn't. The other problem I have with the current system is that why do we need to wait for decades for someone to get cancer to pick up other people in whom we can prevent cancer? Which is counterintuitive, especially in today's day in technology. So I think the system is not working well enough. You have a system where 90% of people are unaware and 60% of people can never be identified. Which other disease condition do we do this? I mean, if you had a test for diabetes and you are using a test that's going to miss 60% of diabetics, I mean, are you going to? So why have we been doing it here? I also feel that diagnosing someone after they've got a cancer diagnosis is potentially a failure of cancer prevention. That needs to be addressed. So an approach of offering testing to everybody can circumvent these issues and at least offer the opportunity to pick up more people at risk. So we do have the technology to do this now, and the costs are falling. There is no reason not to consider this. And with all this in mind, we set up a study. Now we published a lot of papers on it, and I'm going to try and summarize the data in the next 4 or 5 slides. About 10 years of work. So what we did was, when you're doing a scientific research or a study, one of the best study designs is to compare what your new intervention is, the new thing you will propose, with the old one. And so this was a randomized study. It's called randomization. So using a computer algorithm, you randomly divide, you have no control over it, people into 2 groups. And in one group of people, you do the standard of care, and in the other group of people, you do the new intervention. So in one group, we went by the clinical criteria-based testing, and in the other group, we went by testing everybody. There were 1,034 people in the study. We worked with lots of community organizations. We launched it from high. And we found that 60% of the BRCA carriers are missed by a current clinical NHS-based testing. The prevalence we found about 2.9%. So 1 in 33, about 3%, which is consistent with what the international literature reports of 1 in 40. And almost an even split between BRCA1 and BRCA2. it was feasible, it was acceptable, it had satisfaction of about 95%. We looked at different ways of delivering this in a community setting and worked closely with a number of community charities, lots of colleagues, lots of individuals. We ran centers all over. Michelle sitting in the audience, and she ran one of our centers for us. And we used a DVD-based approach to counsel. You can't have one-to-one counseling or the traditional models of counseling in those days when you're going to do large-scale testing. And there isn't a workforce to deliver that. It's not a viable pathway or approach to do large-scale testing. So one approach we studied was using DVD-based approach. And we found that that's feasible. We can do it on a community basis. It's not inferior in terms of knowledge. It gives the risk perception, you get satisfaction. It was equivalent in uptake of testing. It was more time to history. Those data we published. In another study, we also looked at using a web-based approach and a hotline to provide information to BRCA testing and other gene testing. And that also that was more recent, that's 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that had about 85% uptake of testing for more general population, but just gives you proof of concept of the approach. It had high satisfaction, reduced cancer worry, improved risk perception, and not negatively impact the well-being or quality of life. From the Jewish population testing study, when we analyzed the long-term data, we have at least 3 years follow-up data. We found a reduction in anxiety with time, and the reduction in anxiety was greater in the population testing arm compared to family history testing arm. So, the important thing is there was an increase in anxiety. This is a statistical reduction. I don't think it's really got a clinical, the level of reduction is probably not clinically beneficial, but it's not showing an increase and it's showing some benefit from an anxiety perspective in the general population. There are lots of other curves in graphs I'm not showing, but just summarizing it, there was no difference in depression, quality of life, uncertainty, or overall impact of the genetic test result. And there are various validated tools we use to assess all these sorts of things. There was a decrease in distress with time and decrease in health anxiety. Health anxiety is separated from general needs. This is one of the things we wanted to see also was, if someone tests negative, you don't go start smoking more, drinking more, you're not going for the routine screening. So we wanted to look at that aspect of people who tested negative in particular, and we did not find that happen. So there was no difference in alcohol frequency or quantity. This is something we published just recently. Physical activity of fruit and vegetable intake, smoking, or routine breast screening behavior. So you went for your normal mammograms if you tested negative. So there wasn't a negative impact from say testing negative on the population testing basis, which I think was important. When we look, so at the outset, people who were interested came from the study. So clearly, there's an interest that you won't come forward to do the study. There was about 60% retention to undergo testing when people came in, but the uptake ended up being about 88%. So that was the impact maybe of the counseling and the information given taking. There was no significant difference. The Jewish community has heterogeneity in it. The differences depending on perception of cultural Jewishness or religious Jewishness, and the denominational differences in the community. We have Orthodox, liberal, Reform, affiliated, and so on. And if we looked at it by denominational affiliation or by some validated scales on how people perceive themselves to be, we didn't find difference in uptake or intention to test. So there was, even in the Orthodox community, an interest and intention of people to put testing. So we looked at it quite extensively to see if it would be cost effective for the health system. This is a complex mathematical analysis. And you end up building this, the faint thing in the middle is going to be a model, a picture of the snapshot of the model, it's too small to see it properly. It's ended up showing, analysis, you weigh up the costs and the consequences. And the consequences is in terms of how many life years you save. And that's adjusted for your quality of life. It's not only your length of life, but your quality of life is called QALY. And the NHS will invest in something if the cost to the exchequer or the government is less than £30,000 for quality adjusted life here. So we got a minus result. So that means it's cost saving for the lives it saves. So there are not many interventions in medicine that will save you lives and money, but Jewish population BRCA testing in the NHS is one of them. So the 3 published cost effectiveness analysis and then an independent review by the York Health Economic Consortium through the NIA, which is undertaken. It shows its cost saving. So what are we doing now? Katrina was mentioned earlier, she started Jnetics, but she is also working with us and taking forward a review of cancer awareness and gene testing in the community. So there's a qualitative work ongoing, plus we're trying to see what is the level of awareness among various organizations in the community. And this hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months we will have analyzed the data and publish something, but this will feed into whatever else is planned going forward. So I think this is an important piece of work that's been undertaken. Especially now the other members of the team who are working on this. And it's not just a study that we did, but there were other studies also in other parts of the world. They have been, particularly in Israel, there was my colleague Fred Levy-Lehart, who led a big study there. There's the B4 study in the States that reported recently, the gene screen study in Australia, and there was a Canadian study which ran around the same time as ours, led by Stephen Marlowe in Canada. And all the results are very, very similar. Those are all single arm studies. GCAPs will be randomized. So the quality of the evidence you get from randomization is better than you get from there, but the reports are similar. So I think population BRCA testing in the Jewish population is feasible, acceptable, has high satisfaction, cost effective, you can do it in the community setting. In cost efficient approaches, it does not harm psychological well-being or quality of life compared to standard testing. So Israel changed policy in 2021, and which is great. It's now being implemented more, but so COVID is settled. And in the UK, we've been working quite hard with the NHS cancer program, and we hope to implement a program through the NHS. Free at the point of entry, sometime early next year. Still being worked on. So it will be delivered but through the North Thames GMSA, and there will be a clear pathway of access. It will be saliva based, DNA based. All community organizations will need to come together to work and deliver this. You'll be linked into regional genetic service pathways. There will be clear access for downstream high-risk screening program, and options to see specialist services for screening and prevention and so on. And so yeah, it's quite exciting times. It's been a long journey. We're all excited that this is going forward. There's an expert advisory group that is overseeing all this, and it's a collection of the great and the good. Lots of people on it, and it's chaired by Peter Johnson, who's the National Cancer Program Director. Just to acknowledge lots of people who are involved in GCAPs and people on the expert advisory group who are currently working with us on the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit. It's not easy to summarize 10 years of work in 20 minutes. There's some fantastic work being done there, and obviously the NHS that seem to be the lights. And I'm just wondering at this stage, before we move on to the next speaker, if there are any questions that we want to throw at Ranjit. It might be worth doing it now while it's fresh in everyone's mind. Are there any questions from the floor?
So, family found out the mother's BRCA, grandmother passed away to breast cancer, and her mother passed away to ovarian. They have a daughter, she gets tested, she's 19 years old. What advice medically would you suggest to that girl who starts off life? Would you say be monitored until you're going to get married and start a family? What would you advise?
So from the age of 19 onwards, I guess there's the predominant advice around that, say 19 to 25, 30, would be around reproductive choices, lifestyle choices, so options of leading a healthy lifestyle which reduces your cancer risk. If you're looking at contraception, then contraceptive choices which will affect your cancer risk, for example. So if you are going to take the pill, within 5 years, the pill halves your ovarian cancer risk. It might slightly, the data on whether pill increases breast cancer risk or not in this context of BRCA is conflicting, but assuming it does increase slightly breast cancer risk, probably take it earlier on if you're going to take it, so that the actual increase in risk is small, because earlier on the risk of breast cancer is very, very small. So whatever jump you get is going to be really small, the benefit of ovary, or don't take the pill. Consider an alternative method of contraception. You might decide to plan your family in a way that you might finish it earlier before your risk begins to rise. So there's an opportunity to reflect and make various different types of choices. There's an opportunity to think about PGT and those sorts of situations. In 10 years' time, this field is going to be drastically different. That's the other thing I would say. So come back in 10 years when the risk begins to rise, and we'll see what's the latest. And I can assure you that there's lots of things happening in the research sphere, which some of which might come to fruition. And there could be more options of screening and prevention. The NHS breast cancer screening program starts on 30. It's an annual screen. It's MRI to 50, and the mammograms are a combination of programs. So the high-risk breast cancer screening program starts. There's chemo prevention with tamoxifen, which reduces the risk of receptor-positive breast cancer. Ovarian cancer screening isn't there at the moment, but we wait for NICE to report in a couple of years. And we are in the process of starting other research study where we hope we will have something in 10 years' time for this context of, say, BRCA. We don't have it as yet.
Can I ask why ovarian was we all knew about cervical cancer, everyone, why was ovarian the one that was you need to go and get screened? Why is it never been?
So we've never found something that's so effective that we can do it properly. So we've been doing studies on ovarian cancer for 20 years. I've been working in ovarian cancer screening since 2007, since I started this. We've been involved in both. There's been a high risk screening study in the UK called UK Fox. There's been a low risk screening study, which is one of the largest randomized trials in the world, 200,000 women in that, and the general population screening. And those mature data were published just last year. It did not show that we saved lives from screening in the low risk population. So those data, that's why we don't have a national screening program. Now, the high-risk study was never designed to show that we saved lives, designed to see does the test work well. The test works well, but we don't have an answer to whether we save lives. That's an issue that's being addressed in the NICE committee. But there is ongoing screening research by our group, by lots of other groups nationally, internationally, which I hope into over 10 years' time to answer specifically on the 19-year-old question, because the risk of ovarian cancer doesn't start for 35. I hope we'll come to fruition by that time, and there may be more options. But prevention is very effective. Removing tubes and ovaries once you've completed your family will prevent you from getting cancer. There is an issue of hormone replacement. So if you've had breast cancer, it's a problem because you may not be able to take HRT, and HRT is critically important to maintain good long-term health. But there is also the option of having the tubes out initially and then the ovaries out later while maintaining your ovarian function, because most of these cancers come from the tube, not the ovary. And we are running a big national study on that at the moment. It's called Protector. So there's a whole range of options from surgical prevention for ovarian cancer, for breast cancer, chemo prevention of breast cancer. There is emerging data suggesting aspirin may be beneficial for ovarian cancer prevention and increased risk of women. So I think there's all these things to consider.
Question. The CA125, is that effective? Is that reliable?
So that's CA125 has been evaluated in screening trials, and the way to look at CA125 is not just the lab value, but you need to look at how the velocity or the lab value changes over time. So change in trend is really important, and there are now complex mathematical algorithms, AI algorithms that evaluate it. We have one in our that's been evaluated in our research team in these screening trials, but also there are other colleagues, and there are multiple different algorithms which evaluate it. So what it shows is you can pick up early cancers. You're reasonably good at saying if someone may not have a cancer, and it's got a good. So the number of operations you need to do to pick up one cancer is acceptable to women. It's between 3 to 4. But what we don't have is a big, we're not sure if the number of early cancers will translate into saving lives. So that's the conundrum at the moment in the high-risk screening sphere. And that's what the evidence is what NICE is grappling with at the moment. And so yes, so we can downstage cancers, so pick up more early cancers. We do have a screening tool, but we don't know if that saves lives in a high-risk women. We might have to live with that uncertainty a bit more.
So, does that answer the question? So there was just one more from Cheryl, and then I'm going to maybe move it on if that's okay, and we'll take more questions at the end.
I just want to clarify about this changes to the warehouse screening program. So you're talking from age 30, but actually sometimes screening is not as early as 25, but it's very much patient dependent based on family history. And anyone who's tested within their genetic service, if they're under the age of 30, will do that as stratification for them. So we wait till 30, I wait till 25, we will kind of going back to the results tested.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's lots of questions, but if we maybe move on and then we can come back at the end and the speakers will hang around afterwards as well. Thank you, Ranjit. So as Ranjit said, we're all very, very excited about this screening programme that the NHS will be launching hopefully early 2023. But as a community, the stakeholders within the programme, we have to make sure that this is done in a responsible and effective and supportive manner. And that nicely takes me on to my next speaker, who is Lisa from CEO of I was going to talk about services that I have available.
Where everybody's speaking. Evening, everyone. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about HI and what we do in terms of BRCA. So HI Cancer Care, those of you who don't know, is the Jewish community's cancer support organisation for anyone who's been affected by cancer diagnosis. Started in 1990 by two remarkable women, Frances Weingarten, best memory, who had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, and Susan Shipman, whose daughter Natalie, best memory, had been diagnosed with a brain tumour at the age of 3. Sadly, Natalie passed away just before her 8th birthday. Frances lived for another 26 years, albeit with significant physical limitations as a result of her cancer treatment. Although impacted in different ways, both women arrived at the same conclusion: that cancer had come into their lives for a reason, and that something positive had to come out of their experiences. They set about establishing a culturally sensitive, dedicated support organisation for Jewish cancer patients and their loved ones. Little did they know of the seismic impact they would have on the Jewish community, the wider community across the UK, and increasingly all over the world. They made the deliberate choice to name the organisation Chai, the Hebrew word for life. It embraced their belief and experience that people live with and beyond a cancer diagnosis. And more than that, there was an affirmation that life, whatever the ultimate outcome, needs to be lived with as much spirit, comfort, dignity, and meaning as possible. That spirit has imbued the organisation with an energy and passion, chaired by a wonderful Louise Harbour, sitting over there, and is supported by a dedicated and passionate team of HI. We are now supporting over 3,500 cancer patients and their family members. But that doesn't tell the whole story. HI's impact has a far greater reach. We are far from being a peripheral outpost in Hendon. We are the heart of cancer support, not just the leading voice within our own community, but nationally and internationally, being called on to share advice, best practices, and expertise with many high-profile organisations. This is reflected in our collaborations with established and highly regarded bodies such as Marie Curie Cancer Care and the Royal Free Hospital Trust. Our eminent advisory board keep us up to date with the latest research and treatments across the cancer spectrum, so that we can proactively develop new services in line with those advances to the benefits of our clients. 40% of HI's clients are the family and friends of cancer patients. For so long, we heard from loved ones that they did not deserve the support that cancer patients receive. But we recognise that cancer has a ripple effect and its impact goes beyond the patient. So now it's not unusual for us to be supporting 3 or even 4 generations in one family. This is our flagship centre. We have 10 satellite centres throughout the UK, supporting our clients nationally and internationally. There is no typical client. Each person is different and will have their own specific needs and circumstances. Our clients can come to us at any stage of their cancer journey. For some, it's when they first receive a diagnosis. For others, when they're going through difficult treatment. And for many of our clients, it's not until they finish treatment that they feel they want the support and are able to seek help. With 65 specialised services, we are confident that we can meet the needs of all those who turn to us. There is no time to list all of the services, but to tell you quickly of a few, we provide counselling for individuals, couples, families, play, art and music therapy for many children affected by a cancer diagnosis through our High Schools programme, a range of complementary therapies to mitigate some of the side effects of treatment, including massage, reflexology, healing and Reiki, to name but a few. We provide physiotherapy to help after surgery, and even when going through chemotherapy and radiotherapy. We even have a gym here. High deals head on with the many taboos that still surround cancer. We will speak about things that no one else is prepared to speak about. The physical and emotional changes that can have a huge impact on family dynamics and intimate relationships, the topics that are not easy to discuss with loved ones. For many people, High is the only place where they can talk freely on these sensitive issues, confident that we have the knowledge and expertise to make a significant and tangible difference. Tonight we're here to talk about BRCA. High offers a safe place to discuss BRCA issues with counsellors who have received specialist training from the Royal Marsden and Northwick Park Hospital genetic teams. Cheryl over there has come and spoken to our counsellors, and they've received some training. We see individuals and couples who are thinking of having genetic testing. We talk through the many implications of having a BRCA test, as it's a very complex issue. Many questions can be brought up. What happens if you test positive? What do you tell your family? Who do you tell in your family? What are the fertility implications? Will you pass the gene on to future generations? The questions and dilemmas can be overwhelming. Sometimes one person in a family may want to be tested and other members do not, and they don't want to know the results. At High, we also support our clients after they have a positive result, and what that might mean for themselves and their family members. We have groups for BRCA carriers without cancer and a group for those BRCA carriers who do have cancer. Knowing you're not alone is so important, as the impact of a positive result can feel very isolating. We work very closely with Jnetics and have an active cross-referral system, as we do with Hannah. Working together, each organisation can reach all parts of the community and provide the wraparound support people need to make the best BRCA choice to their situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any questions about High that you would like to ask Lisa at this stage, or we can move on to Rabbi Oliver and come back again? Okay. And last but not least, to pass the stage to Rabbi Oliver, who is going to share his experiences of being in the practice.
Hi everybody. I'm actually going to ask somebody. Does anybody want to volunteer just to fill that with water? I'm a bit hoarse this evening, so I'm worried I can.
It's here.
Oh, there's one here. Okay. Just no, just a bottle. Yeah. Sorry. My voice won't run out, but it's an ultimate fear that standing and speaking, the voice will run out. I'm Rabbi Oliver. Welcome this evening. I first of all just wanted to mention a couple of thank yous. The next 3 years of work for the Jewish community are going to be significant and important, and in some way or other fundamental to some aspects, particularly on this BRCA topic, of the future of our community in its essence. It will challenge us to work together. Thank you so much. It will challenge us to work together. It will challenge us also to bridge some of the community divisions that might otherwise exist. So thank you to our professor here this evening, to Ranjit, for the work that you've done so far to get us to this point. And thank you to our two partner organizations who are really front and center of this effort to spread this message about BRCA. My rabbis love having their name in lights. This isn't the kind of lights that I imagine for myself in terms of my work as a rabbi, but I also think that this is very, very important and significant work that we're all doing this evening. I notice and note that probably many people in this room, we won't do a show of hands, but are already in some way or another affected by BRCA, and that's what brings us together. But as the evidence suggests, as a group of people in this room alone, we have a lot of significant work to do as a community to reach, depending on how you count Jewish community, whether it's 250,000 or 350,000, we have a significant amount of work to do to reach almost 90% of our Jewish and extended Jewish community who don't know anything about BRCA. And that's the challenge that lies ahead. And my story, there's lots of words of instruction, but my story specifically is reason why we need not to wait until a cancer diagnosis to discover BRCA. So I actually had, I rolled the dice quite a few times in my life. I had cancer at a very young age, at the age of 17, and it was a very treatable cancer, and I survived and lived well up until now. But an aspect of that comes back around in my own personal story. My BRCA story begins probably even before I was born, that my grandmother, who I never met, died of, I think, probably ovarian cancer at a relatively young age, I think in her 40s. Right. At a young age anyway. And a year after my cancer, when I was 17, my mum also developed her own cancer and lived well for a couple of years, but eventually passed away from an ovarian-related cancer. There was nothing that we knew about BRCA in the early years of the 2000s. Well, our community knew very much about BRCA in those years, more than 20 years ago now. And she wasn't even tested for BRCA at that time. We, as a family, used some of high services and benefited from some of that part of the story, but not in relationship to anything to do with BRCA. Fast forward then another 10 or so years, and my younger sister, Betsy, developed breast cancer. And this was before her probably 28th birthday. Unusual story in the arc of BRCA and the story of the BRCA gene, but at that point, now almost, sorry, my dates are very good. Yeah, like another kind of 12 years on from when my mum had her own diagnosis, BRCA was very much in the story. And she was actually living in New Zealand at the time, but returned after not too long to the UK. And part of her treatment, because I think, if I'm correct, Professor, one of the parts of BRCA is it also affects outcomes of treatments for cancer patients. So as part of her cancer treatment, she also had a BRCA test positive. So the scientists here will tell you that it's a 50-50 chance of developing BRCA. In my family, my blood relatives, I have two blood sisters, one who passed away, Betsy, my little sister, but we're 3 out of 3. So we're 100% BRCA diagnosed. Betsy also lived well with her cancer, and her cancering journey was another story for another time, but in good strength and in you know, good lessons for life that she taught us all of those who she left behind, but died before her 30th birthday 7 years ago. And at that point, we all got tested. The two remaining sisters, me and my twin sister. So I'm the brother, she's a twin. Me and my sister both got tested, and both with a positive BRCA diagnosis. We both carry a BRCA gene mutation. That means, in this story, that means very different things for a woman and for a man. So for a man, that does involve some kind of incremental increase in cancer. Perhaps I'll be told it's not incremental, but nevertheless, not a massive jump in statistical chance of developing or breast cancer or prostate cancer as examples. But it did have an effect on family life. I don't want to tell my children when they're older that they all have to have a BRCA test and go through IVF and PGD that we have done in our family, which is a particular type of IVF fertility treatment, which I'll explain in a second. And I also don't want to have to explain to a daughter that at the age of 18 or 20 or 30 that she has to have X or Y preventatives, or would have to consider having X or Y preventative surgeries going forward. Qualification, I think, as was already described, in another 10 or 20 years' time, this field is likely to look very different. So we imagined what we wanted to do for our children, but also with consciousness that this particular cancer field is between 20 years ago and now, and another 20 years is constantly changing and shifting. My sister, acknowledging that Betsy had passed away at a very young age, went ahead and had a double mastectomy probably 4 years ago now, and has not had a oophorectomy, ovarian and tube removed at this point, but has recently had a baby, so there was kind of wisdom behind that at that point in her life. I think just in relation to that, that's a very significant choice to make as a woman. And I can't speak for her. I have lots of other colleagues who are champions of this story, people who work inside this BRCA community, cancer prevention community, research community, powerful women who will come and talk to you about their own experience of preventative elective surgery. But my sister's operation, as an example, went reasonably wrong at a point in time and was never really life-threatening, but did certainly affect some of the outcomes for her, and especially kind of around pain management for the year after her surgery, definitely diminished her quality of life during that time. So in each of the statistics, there's a story of exactly how that works, and that's certainly the case, as was already described, for oophorectomy or ovarian elective surgery, because that has a whole other array of side effects in terms of bringing on early menopause for women. So there's a whole story in each of these decision-making processes around how you make decisions after BRCA testing. I don't know your personal story, but the bit that wasn't mentioned, and I don't know where you're at in terms of where any of us are at in terms of BRCA testing, but BRCA testing is only a test. And when you test, you know if you're BRCA positive or BRCA negative, if you have a faulty BRCA gene, and it's really from there, if you decide to take a test, that then a whole other series of kind of choices comes up. If you roll the dice and you're a BRCA, you don't have a faulty BRCA mutation, carry on. So that's part of the story that we're trying to present in this, I guess it's a launch event of sorts, in this launch event of sorts, for what the next 3 years will look like. But one of the primary choices that the Jewish community should look at is simply to have a test. The rest of the story is drush, is kind of another layer of decision making for those communities. For me, Rabbi Oliver, my immediate family, I got married 2017, 7 years ago coming up. It was very clear for me that, as I said before, I didn't want to raise kids who then had to be on their 18th birthday kind of surprised. This is the story of the next years of trials and tribulations. It was a story that my family faced. It wasn't something I necessarily wanted to put on my children, even though the BRCA story will look different in another 20 years. We went through the NHS, I got BRCA tested, I said that already. That was a very calm and good experience of care with the NHS. The fertility journey was horrendous. And this will be at some point another part of the story. But we must be grateful for the NHS and everything that it's done for our community and I think for our society more generally over lots of years. But in terms of fertility treatment, it's very tough. I have another condition, I can tell you about another time. We worked out that we would have collectively had to have about 7 different appointments in order to have 1 child. And waiting about almost a year, we worked out that each appointment was taking about 4 months to get the approval for the appointment, then you have to wait another appointment for another 3 months or 4 months for the next appointment. So it worked out that we could have children in like our first child in about 5 years' time at that rate. And it was very stressful. I'm not old and I'm not young to have children. I'm 40 last week, thank you, happy birthday. But it was a very, very, very slow process, and it was one of these, unfortunately, one of these call centres at the NHS that you got through after like 4 days of calling, and then they tell you, sorry, there's no news. So we went private, which was our privilege to be able to do that, and we have 2 beautiful children who are, I think, 99.999% BRCA free, and that's good for our family. The story is, I think with that, I'll kind of finish and happy to answer questions going forward. The fundamental part of why this story and why it's important from the professionals and from the scientists to bring the story to a human level is because in some way or other frames why population testing is so important against what the previous regime or what we had available to us in the NHS as a community, and why this shift is so significant. In my family, we had to wait for 3 different generations of good and powerful and wonderful Jewish women to pass away before we were able to take this gene and do something else with it. And in the context of population testing, there isn't the need to wait for somebody in the family to pass away from cancer in order to take preventive action, elective action, whatever the action is that the individual decides to take on. It will ultimately, I think in almost all cases, reduce the chance of that person having to face cancer. There are no certainties in this world. You can, as I often say when I speak, you go get run over by a red bus at any point in time. But there are things that we can do as a community to protect lives and to prevent cancer reaching our community when we can. I think I'll leave it there. I'm happy to answer any and all questions. My real message from this evening is that as a community here gathered, we have a really crucial and important opportunity over the next 3 years to go out and tell all of the different people related, connected, disconnected from the Jewish community about this population testing, and hopefully make a significant difference for those who get to step forward and have that test and make some important decisions about how they will respond to BRCA and hopefully drive down the incidence of particular types of cancer in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Oliver, for sharing your personal story and for really sort of bringing everything to life and making us all realize just how important this screening program is going to be for our community in protecting future generations. Happy to now take any questions to any of the speakers at this stage. So we have a lady at the back.
I guess that's fun, but with the BRCA screening, obviously there's the potential to screen women and men for cancers earlier on, detected and sort of solving from that side. Is the NHS set up, and I guess from our own story, is it set up or is it going to be set up in a way for future generations in terms of fertility options, things like IVF, knowing that if at the moment more than 90% don't know their carriers, once that opens up and you have loads of young couples knowing that they're carriers, how's the NHS going to facilitate that, or is that not decided?
I think for the Jewish community testing bit, there is enough capacity in the NHS to manage. There will be increased workload to manage that workload. And screening programs are running. Yes, we didn't have a good experience with the fertility pathway. There is a wait in the PGD treatment cycle, but there are also lots of success stories with the NHS pathway. And we definitely have patients in our clinic who go through the PGD pathway and come out the other end. It is a long and drawn out process. It can take a year, 2 years sometimes. Just even going through the process, not understanding. First, that Oliver knows about it more than I do, been through it. But there are success stories, and it is a pathway that does work. It's free in the NHS. I think as awareness increases, as we move, even I think from the Jewish population perspective, there will be enough capacity, and capacity will grow. One of the things that will happen over the next few years is, as this pilot reports, when we make plan for a broader rollout, there will be an opportunity to upscale capacity, and all those costs are built into the modeling. So we should be able to afford it. It's not, the analysis is not costed, it's not really costed. But there will be a need if we go into general population. That's what we can't deliver without a big increase, a much larger increase in capacity, I suspect. And those are studies which we are just about to kick off. We want to do general population testing, and we will start next year with a big study. And I think bringing that to fruition, but that's a 5-year study to plan and implement. Then when that policy changes, and that if the National Screening Committee would pick it up on a very large scale, then without doubt there would need to be upscaling of downstream pathways and infrastructure for that purpose. I don't think the Jewish community is, it's a big community, but compared to the large general population, there's a huge difference in the size. So I think we should be able to manage, I suspect, with this, and we are all looking forward to seeing how this pans out. We will learn as we go forward in the process.
This gentleman.
I'm interested to understand what the patterns that might exist. I don't know if the research has been done, but are there patterns where within families, a particular type of BRCA2, and presumably there's a lot of there's a pattern of at a particular age, a particular type of cancer, or is it pretty randomly different types within the system?
You have families where breast cancer may segregate more. You have some families where ovarian cancer may segregate more. Then there are families where you can get it dependent. So if you have the age of cancer can influence whether you have a very early onset cancer, it's more likely to be BRCA2. But it's pretty difficult to precisely say you've got cancer at 35 years old or BRCA2 or something like that. You can't say that until you test. But there definitely, we do see that in some families there are patterns where some cancer may segregate more, but it doesn't mean that you're not at risk of the other cancer if you carry the gene. The penetrance is to some extent fairly independent, but it can be affected by strong family histories of one type of cancer. It does the estimate of the risk is shifted, but it doesn't go from being high risk to low risk. It will always remain high risk.
I walked in here knowing 0. I'm probably 0 plus 1 at the moment, but I didn't know, for example, that we all have a BRCA gene 1 and 2. So my question is there a gene therapy to help repair the rogue gene?
Not at the moment, not for BRCA. Maybe it will come in the future. People are also looking at vaccines and other things, the research arena.
So it's a possibility.
Who knows? Yes, I mean other parts of science, yes. So not for BRCA at the moment.
Thank you.
But there's definitely a lot of research happening in the vaccine sphere. There's nothing that's very.
But the possibility at the moment is IVF PGD, that for every generation, my kids compared to the previous generation don't have BRCA, so they also don't have a faulty BRCA gene to pass on. They won't, if I'm correct,
Yes, you're
they
right.
won't be able to pass on as BRCA carriers the BRCA gene. So that's the corrective, if you like, the possibility at the moment, which is almost as good as a gene therapy, but slightly different way around. So again, on an embryonic level, is that the thing?
Thank you.
I was just wondering if there's been any research into what the community about the full population testing would be. Like, is there any idea how much the Jewish community would be interested in taking part in population testing?
About 70%. So the problem with calculating that is invariably people who are interested come forward. So when you go out and say ask lots of people to come forward, and those who are interested will come forward. The other thing is that it's a dynamic thing. I think as we go through life, maybe today is not the right time for me, but maybe in 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 15 years' time, or 20 years' time, I'll feel differently. It's the same with any intervention like preventive surgery or something. Today may not be the right time. Similarly, I think for gene testing, it's a dynamic process. The research shows that about 70% of people who registered with the study had a test. 60% who registered, who came forward initially, had an intention to consider testing. 88% ended up who came and had counseling ended up having testing, and 12% did. 2/3 were women, 1/3 were men. We have the general population testing studies. We have similarly, we have an 85% uptake for people who come forward. When we went and surveyed women in the general population, if they were interested to find out about the risk and whether they would have gene testing, then there was about a 70% intention to undergo testing. But that's about as good stats that we have.
Fine. I just wanted to ask about BRCA in men, and you mentioned it obviously increased risk of prostate cancer, and there's the PSA testing. Apart from PSA, you can see, is there any studies about doing early MRIs or anything like that?
Yeah, so Cheryl, study about it. There's the impact study, which is on another thing about Professor Rossi's.
Impact, there's quite a few studies going on at the moment. So if people do have a family history or prostate cancer, you can actually self-confirm. Okay.
Used to be 40 for impact.
40, yeah.
Used to be 40 for impact, but there are research studies which are ongoing which have shown some benefit, particularly for BRCA2. The more recent data is more robust for BRCA2.
Yeah, and they are looking at the PSA plus. Yeah, and they're thinking about more targeted. So again, focusing on high risk population because PSA testing is still there is some debate.
Lots of questions. We talked a lot about breast cancer, ovarian cancer. One of the cancers is pancreatic cancer.
Yes.
There is a very poor outcome. I mean, is there anything that you can do about that? And then there's the question of, well, is it worth being tested if you know that maybe you've got a history of pancreatic cancer and there's nothing you can do about it?
Well, it's worth being tested from the perspective that your risk of breast and ovary cancer is much higher, and there's definitely something you can do about it. There is the Europax study, as Cheryl mentions, is a screening study for pancreatic cancer, but there is no screening tool which is shown to be effective for pancreatic cancer today. So, in a nutshell, no, you can enter research trials, but there's no trial showing benefit from screening. There are other biomarker studies which are now running or being set up. There's Europanc, there's a urine biomarker study which is looking at screening, but there's no screening strategy today which is clinically proven and effective that's going to affect the outcome to save your life from a pancreatic cancer perspective. The positive thing about, I suppose the only positive thing is that the chance of getting pancreatic cancer in absolute numbers is very small. It's just 3% or 4%.
But also another advantage with the it's one of the things that pancreatic cancers is often it's kind of the last thing they want is the symptoms for pancreatic cancer can be quite general. So if there is no evidence that there might be an increased risk, it means your GP might be around to it, which means it's not, they don't wait until, there's the possibility of earlier diagnosis. So that is one of the very important issues around genetic testing, and you can test because just the families around pancreatic cancer, I know that's what you can say, cover, your other genes, but again, it's would it be a benefit? For some people it is beneficial, but for others,
I picked up pancreatic cancer looking for ovary cancers.
Yeah.
This is the BRCA.
Okay, shall we take one more question and then maybe close out, but if anybody wants to come and talk to Rajan.
So obviously, it was an anecdote about the symptom pathway with the NHS. And I was wondering how long ago that was, 60 months, that period of time. And Professor Ranjan, you mentioned that you've had innovation about these more or less than 1 to 2 years in your clinics. I was wondering, so first of all, how long ago was that? And would that go
So we have our referral pathway for our clinic goes to Guy's Hospital. We have a very good relationship with the PGT team there. And our patients do get seen in a reasonable timely fashion. In my experience, most patients want to know about it and we go for an explanatory conversation, but very few, much smaller proportion take it up. Not everybody who's going through, in fact, it's a small minority in our experience who actually eventually end up going through the whole thing, because it is a complicated process as Rahul was explaining.
This was about 5 years ago. There is a problem with relying on one person speaking about their own personal experience, because that's very possible that different people have different experiences. But we know from where the NHS stands right now that it has in the past tended to be a very good emergency service, and when life is at risk, it's often less responsive when we're talking about non-emergency and kind of crucial medicine, and unfortunately, IVF PGD exists in that category. But we are one family.
yeah, since they particularly offers
So dire need for that, yes.
One little one.
So you're relying on families to have the conversation with their family members, children, siblings, whatever. Would you consider going into schools and talking to sixth formers about it, like we talked about TASAPs? Because that is very important.
Michelle will answer that question. That's what Michelle does very effectively, and she's considering that.
Going to schools for about 15 years. We do 6 schools, we currently have 26 schools and universities. And what we do is talk about all the things, all the above. So genetics, lifestyle, and breast self-examination. Thinking that is very important. For the various reasons that put out of the when you're comparing with more difficult, talking about young women. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we're doing a big research study at the moment, looking back and looking forward at the girls that we're seeing, the girls that we've seen, see the impact that has been in the work with. And we're sure that people are here to do that.
But are the boys aware that it affects them as well?
Yeah, so the discussion for this year is going to be too, because when we go into the schools, the 17-year-olds don't know the boys there. When we go into universities, they do, a lot of their fun of it, and we have all kinds of other conversations about trans and all sorts of things. But yes, there is going to be.
Thank you. So, well, I can tell by the number of the questions, it is obviously a very, very lively and interesting topic and a very, very exciting time for the Jewish community moving forward. And I think one important thing to take away from here is it's not really just about tonight, the questions we're asking tonight. We're all here to support moving forward. Hi, Jnetics, there's BYB, there's Katrina, there's Ranjit. As a team, there are plenty of people here within the community who can support, who can help. So please do not hesitate to reach out. I think to thank everyone for coming, but to give a huge thank you and round of applause to our speaker this evening. Sorry?
Ovarian cancer action developed.
Oh.
So
So we've got Marie Claire from Ovarian Cancer Actions as well. So I don't know if you want to come forward at the end, if anyone's got any questions, they can come forward and ask you. Oh, yes. And as I said at the beginning, this is our first lecture series in our genetics philosophy series diving into our gene pool. The first one's all been about BRCA. The next one, which is in December, is about genetic testing, regulations and realities. So a very, very different topic. We will obviously be emailing out and telling everyone about it, but please keep close to what's going on. And if you are interested, please make sure to come to the next session. So thank you to everyone. And as I said, the speakers will be here if anybody wants to come forward. Thank you all.
Oh, sorry.